Hello, everyone. I'm Frank Garza with Lean Startup Company, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. Today's topic is how to innovate better by listening to your customers. And moderating the discussion is our own Lean Startup Company faculty member, Elliot Susel. Our guest is entrepreneur and founder of Kova Digital, Sonali Shetty. And with that, I'll hand things off to Elliot.
Hello and welcome to this week's webcast. My name is Elliot Susel, and with us today is Sonali Shetty from Kova Digital. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Elliot. Glad to be here and delighted to be speaking with you.
Awesome. We are going to be talking today about innovation, and this is a dangerous term. So let us define a little more clearly exactly what it is we'll be talking about. We're referring to doing something that's not business as usual, that gets us desired outcomes. And we're going to be exploring that topic. Our agenda today is as follows. First, I want to learn a little bit about Kova Digital. What is this company that you founded? What do you do? And what was your journey? What is your story? And then from there, I want to segue pretty naturally into the topic of innovation. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. So let's kick this thing off. What is Kova Digital?
So Kova Digital is a product innovation agency that I founded and bootstrapped about a decade ago. And the purpose of that, I had done consulting before that, have always been in technology. The purpose of that, of founding the company, was my observation of the challenges that companies and startups face with product innovation. My founding thesis was that people are going to interact with brands primarily through products. And now it's a pretty obvious thing, but if you think back 10 years ago, it was a new idea. And kind of interesting, we had to educate our customers as well on what this meant. They were very accustomed to doing staff aug, but when a company came along and said, we're product innovation, and we really believe that you need to be thinking in terms of product, you need to have this product mindset. That was a shift in thinking that we needed to help them get through.
So when you're saying product, are we talking digital product, physical
Absolutely. So digital products, we primarily do mobile, web, IoT, chatbots, machine learning, so that world. But our founding story was as one of the first third-party app developers on Facebook. So I like to tell people, I like to use the Deng Xioping analogy of crossing the river by feeling the stones. So that's pretty much what we did. We always knew we wanted to be a product innovation company, but we sort of pivoted and modified in the best lean startup tradition in terms of what that meant.
Well, let me take a step back from that even and say, did you just roll out of bed one day and say you know what I want to do? I want to start an innovation consultancy, right? Like what was the first part of that journey?
I sort of saw the shift. So I had worked in Silicon Valley previously, and I saw the shift in mindset. Social media was just sort of coming along, and Facebook had opened up their API to third-party app developers. Apple had just opened up the App Store, and this idea that you could now directly communicate with your customers, and the sort of the relationship between a brand and their customers was going to fundamentally change was something I couldn't escape from. And so I wanted to bring that not just to startups, but also to corporations, and sort of educate them on what this change meant for them and how they needed to prepare for it, what the impact was. So it was sort of rolled out of bed and came up with this idea, but in a way it was also a culmination of a long journey of thinking about what value means to the end user.
Got it. Now, I have met a number of sort of entrepreneurs that, want to start their own thing. And the advice I've sort of given for a consulting business is like, oh, you want to start a consulting business? Go sell the work. Because in trying to sell the work, you talk to your customers, you learn about what they want and need. And the faster you can get that learning and often rejection around what you believed that someone might want as a consulting service and what they actually need, the faster you can get to what might actually be valuable. So to that end, talk to me a little bit, like, so you're getting started. How did you find your first couple clients?
First couple of clients were through, obviously they knew my previous work and were willing to sort of engage in this new and different way. I would add a couple of things in terms of, obviously go do the work, but I think you also have to have a very clear idea of what it is you want to bring into this world. The sort of, again, vision is another loaded term, but I think it's very appropriate in this, in my experience at least. It's been very, very foundational because there are lots of temptations to do other things, right? Along the way, when times were tough, there have been lots of sort of temptations to do other things to get by. But you have to stick to your founding vision. I found that necessary. I found it necessary to sort of feed my soul, but it gives you direction as well. And the second thing is you have to have a differentiator. If you're doing the same thing as 10 other people are doing, what's the point, really? So I always stuck with, having the vision, having a clear differentiator, sticking to pivoting within that framework of what we wanted to do, and just being very clear.
Yeah, it's funny you use the word pivot, and it's dangerous because that like means something specific. But Silicon Valley has really, especially the TV show, has taken that in some directions that maybe are not the textbook definition, right? But I love that you're referring to vision, because in this case, that's sort of exactly what you mean, where we are changing our focus based on what we've learned, but still having the same vision of what we want to.
Absolutely. So as I told you, we started out as a third-party app developer on Facebook and built, I want to say, over 150 apps and really substantial apps. And the point there was bring functionality to where your audience is. And in those days, think about 10 years ago, they were on social media, on Facebook, and we were seeing huge ROI for our customers. When that sort of changed, the vision was still the same. It was, how do you engage with customers through digital products? But the means changed. So it was more mobile, web, IoT came along. Algorithms and machine learning came along, building APIs. So, I like that analogy of crossing the river, because you always know your goal, but you feel the stones to figure out how you want to get across.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. So, you're now working with a variety of organizations that are interested in innovation work, which again, we've defined as doing something that's not business as usual that gets us some desired outcomes. What in your experience are companies primarily looking for or doing wrong with their innovation plans or programs?
That's a great question. One of the things I observe, no company says that they don't want to do innovation. So innovation is the core value for lots of organizations, startups through, Fortune 200 companies, right? So, but inevitably, especially in the larger companies, there's a conflation between career risk and project risk. So nobody wants to be the tall poppy whose project failed, right?
Yes. Go be innovative, but if you fail, you're fired.
Right. Exactly.
Take risks. You're fired.
And I also think there really are three types of innovation, all of which are important. One is sort of this incremental innovation. It's the Kaizen way. You upgrade your ERP systems. You know what your end state is going to be. You know where you are, and you sort of build towards that. Waterfall works really well. That is essential. And I think IT groups have internalized that. They're very, very good at that.
Okay.
The second kind of innovation is sort of this disruptive incrementalism, to use Clayton Christensen's terminology. So that's sort of the hockey stick approach. And the best example is the iTunes store, right? So that was, in and of itself, it was interesting and new, but it also helped them build an ecosystem and have sort of a huge impact even on selling hardware. So here was a software product that helps them impact their hardware as well.
Got it.
And the third kind is sort of this radical innovation, which is a step change like Uber or Airbnb. That happens very rarely in business. It's almost non-existent in nature. And it mostly happens with startups. It's important, I think, for companies to be aware of that, because you want to know where the proverbial two kids in a garage that are going to disrupt your industry. So you have to be aware of it, but it may not necessarily be applicable in your context. So I like to focus on the sort of Goldilocks, the middle one, the disruptive incrementalism, which gives you sort of hockey stick outcome. Let me give you an example.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Glamorous.
So give me an example. What illustrates?
Absolutely. So this is not as glamorous as Apple, and I've been fortunate to work with a lot of quote unquote boring companies, but it's so fulfilling to bring in new ideas and innovation to their world. So we worked with a moving and storage company. Now, if you think about it, moving and storage hasn't changed since the beginning of time, right? You box things, you put them up, you load them onto a truck, and the truck goes. And our solution to them, to their problems and their desire to change things and to be innovative, was to build a mobile app that was really an organizational tool for their clients. Because the key customer insight there was that most people don't unpack once they've moved.
Yep.
So I still have boxes in my attic. I don't know about you, Elliot.
Well, I can tell you, when I last moved, I remember exclaiming afterwards, like, gosh, I probably didn't need to keep half this stuff, right?
Absolutely.
It stays in the box, that makes sense.
Right. But you want to find that one object and you don't know where it is.
All right.
Now, if you think about it from the company's point of view, it's an incredibly interesting problem to solve. It's a one-time event for an activity that most people hate in an industry that's built on word of mouth, right?
Okay.
So
okay, go on.
Building the product as an organizational tool helped us attack all three problems. We were able to fundamentally shift the customer's perception, right? They felt more in control. The value to them extended beyond that one-time event. It's before the move, the checklist of how to pack and what to pack. And beyond, after the move, in terms of where is my stuff. And it helped the company because it helped the brand stay top of mind. So their neighbor asked for a recommendation. Here was the company that was providing value to them.
Got it.
And that's what I mean with sort of hockey stick impact.
Okay. Now, I mean, did the company as a result of this experience, growth that was exponential? Or
They absolutely did. They were able to leapfrog their competitors, and in an undifferentiated industry,
right,
they were able to bring something radically different to their customers. Now, this was several years ago, and hopefully other people have sort of caught up. So it's a never-ending process. You have to keep thinking through what is value and ways to bring that to life.
Got it. Now, big companies are generally, would you say, good at doing this kind of innovation work or bad?
It depends on the company, but sadly, in my experience, mostly bad.
Okay.
Because everyone is just so busy. It's hard to take time off. Yes, people do offsites and they have these, wonderful, colorful stickies that are a result of that. But then actually implementing something from that, it takes a tremendous, you have to break that inertia and sort of do something different, which is primarily why I built a company. Hopefully, as an outside company, you can come in and sort of jumpstart that.
Well, you know what I heard as a pattern in what you were describing is looking internally rather than looking externally to customers.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yes, no wonder you can't find a big leap if all you're doing is talking to each other. I can tell you, I've never seen an offsite come up with some spectacular new thing unless they already had that customer insight, right? Like that true insight to what a customer wanted and needed.
Absolutely.
You've probably heard the expression "get out of the building."
Right. Oh,
right?
Totally.
Yeah. So,
but on the flip side of that, sometimes, Elliot, it's CEO reads an article in HBR and he sees that Netflix implemented DevOps and had these amazing results, right? So they sort of invented that field. But rather than copy the idea, I like people to think of, copying the thinking behind that idea.
Yeah.
So Netflix's case, the value is, if they have a customer who has 10 minutes and the choice is to go read a book or watch something on Netflix, they wanted the person to have an equal immediacy to Netflix. Yep. Right? So it totally makes sense for them to have, microservices, the whole CI/CD mindset. It makes a lot of sense. But if you don't have that sort of urgency, perhaps you don't need to do that.
Well, let me continue that example you gave. So I believe it's Netflix that uses something that they created called Chaos Monkey.
Mm-hmm.
Chaos Monkey goes along and literally takes down services at random to ensure that they have built so well that it doesn't matter that one of their services is essentially out. Right? So to your point, not everyone should not go try and have a chaos monkey that they create for their own organization, right? Like taking down their services, right? But the idea that perhaps you want to put some emphasis on CI/CD and all of those technical practices, yes, is probably a good one. So
absolutely.
I like
so you have to look at your context. You have to look at your customers, whether they're internal or external, and what is value to them. And really hone in on how do you deliver that value in sort of this impactful way.
Okay, so if organizations are not great at this style of thinking, right, and the instincts are wrong, right? The instincts are like, get in a conference room and like hash it out until you have an answer or whatever, right, rather than interfacing with customers. What would you recommend for starting to head more in the right direction and improve?
This is where the lean startup is foundational, really, in this disruptive incrementalism world. And let me give you a very concrete example that illustrates this. So we were working with a very large manufacturing company in their manufacturing IT. So this was an organization that had been very accustomed to building things and sort of tossing it across the fence with no feedback loop or no understanding really of what their customers wanted.
Feedback? Why do we need to talk with the customers? We expect to buy the product.
Absolutely. And here they're internal customers. So, there was even less of an incentive in their mind for them to get feedback. And we were helping them build a mobile app, mobile product. It ended up being a sort of tablet-based app for their factory floor. So this was for their maintenance department. So think electricians,
internal tech.
Internal. But, maintenance in a factory is an extremely important aspect because, machine downtime is anathema
very
for
expensive
manufacturing, right? So very, very expensive.
All right.
So as per usual, everyone, IT was in the conference room figuring out features, so going down the feature list and the, business requirements, technical requirements, typical waterfall.
All right.
And
by the way, I should interject, right? Like waterfall development is where you write all the requirements first, then you do all the design, then you build the whole thing, you test the whole thing, then you launch, and hopefully nothing went wrong later in the process, because then you got to go back.
Things then change.
Yeah.
Or things then change, right?
Yeah,
so your assumption is that your requirements are set in stone, and you can then build from that. And that's how historically pretty much all IT was done.
Yeah.
So we were able to walk in and sort of convince them with executive support, which I think is a crucial element, to build an MVP. And to build a sort of a low fidelity. So we literally just built, using some CSS and HTML5, just built a very low fidelity prototype. I literally used an iPhone emulator to demo it to the customer group. But we wanted to bring the customers into the process. So we bring the customers in, and immediately the union rep has an objection.
All right.
And that's when the light bulb went off, because they recognized the value of building the MVP. In this case, again, MVP is a term that means different things to different
dangerous. People. I didn't even try to define it because I didn't want to.
Right.
Let's just say what you mean. Anyways, go on.
But sort of bringing something into the customer's hands was critical in surfacing up objections and true requirements.
Yeah.
And they saved a lot of egg on their face. It would have been significant if they had sort of built it as they had previously planned.
Yeah.
And then at the end discovered this objection.
Amazing. Well, let me interject and just say, building something less than the whole thing can profoundly change our understanding of what it is that we need to do, right? So in this case, it involved actually writing some amount of code in order to do the customer demo. And look, you got to meet people where they are, right? So if they think they needed to build the whole thing and you've convinced them to start with a fraction, you've still got a big victory. Often, in coaching teams, I try to hijack before they're even at the point where they have to commit to writing code, right? So what if we just took the mock-ups, right? And we used that to go talk to the customer. Or what if we just, talk to the customer before we've even done mock-ups, before we've even done anything, right? But
absolutely,
you got to meet organizations kind of where they're at.
Yes, you totally do. And in this instance, we had to have something visual and something that felt like it was a mobile app.
Sure.
But it's not just big companies. I see this problem even with startups.
Especially with startups.
Especially with startups. So startups that have strong technical talent immediately want to jump into building something.
Yeah, they sure do.
They don't want to spend the time on product definition, on talking to the customers. Coding is comfortable. It's something they know how to do. So they run towards what they're comfortable doing.
Yep.
The flip side is when you have a startup that's not necessarily technical, but has a customer expert. It's this idea that we know what our customer wants. So all of the knowledge is in our head. We know what they want, need, and therefore we know how to build it. And if you don't mind, I can give you a quick example on that front too, where sort of this lean startup methodology really, really helped me convince the company. And it had nothing to do with the product. So we were building a product for government, so state, local, national government, economic development, right?
Yep.
So sort of a fascinating area because outside of tourism, economic development is the only marketing function that governments do. And it's true across, local government, state, national government, and they spend a lot of money on that function. Great idea. We had an expert on the team who knew all about the space. I still think it's an awesome idea. But actually going through and in that case, it was just a PowerPoint, trying to get initial customers to pay was an insurmountable process because the procurement cycle is so difficult in that space that we couldn't get customers to even buy into the initial stuff. So even though they loved the idea, they think it would provide value, the product itself would have been awesome. These external factors like procurement really hampered adoption. So we saved a ton of time and opportunity cost just by using lean startup methodology.
And so in that case, the thing you built that was less than the whole thing, you said was like a presentation?
It was a presentation.
Okay,
interesting. It was a presentation.
You hit on something earlier that I want to expand upon. And I think we've maybe even talked about it in other episodes where, look, especially startup founders, but even within large companies, people just kind of believe what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
And it is so backwards to me that the way work flows is some executive says, we should do this, right? Because they've got some really clear belief in their mind that it's a thing that we should go do. And the whole organization marches off and does it without collecting data to really prove that it is in fact a thing that is worth doing. And the problem is not necessarily that they're avoiding looking data at all, but that they're not actually looking at data that is a reflection of actual behavior, right? So they look at a market sizing that's like a vague, general way of thinking of all of the potential people that could use it, and they're like, yeah, that's what we're going to go explore, as opposed to running an experiment in which you see, like a non-trivial percentage of the target market actually is doing some desired behavior that would tell us something is worth building, right? And so ego, it happens at startups, within large companies.
It happens everywhere. And I have a favorite saying that if I were to ever get a tattoo, would be my tattoo. It is data trumps emotion, right? So emotion, ego, whatever it is, they're really hypotheses. It's what we believe the market will do or what our customers will do. Let's go test it.
Yep.
And let's do it in a way that's inexpensive, where we can learn early lessons. So, back to the old idea of failure and people having this fear of failure, we need to reframe it as learnings. So if we can test those learnings early and often, then we're so much better off. And you know, I think reframing the test as learnings is a crucial internal sort of shift in mindset that needs to happen.
I would agree. There's this problem that is very pervasive, which is that people think they go to work to build stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. They go to work to learn stuff. And along the way, they'll build things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're no longer, in my opinion, we're no longer in a place where you can just sort of show up mindlessly to a knowledge worker job and just kind of do what you're told. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
At least in the organizations I'm interested in working with, like we've gone way past the point where that is high performing behavior and what a high performing organization is doing. And I want to touch on something you said about price, because you indicated doing something expensive. And with large companies, sometimes they've got a lot of money. I actually am okay with spending a lot of money if it's efficient. And I want to key in on that word because most people hear the word lean startup and they think that means cheap. But it doesn't.
It absolutely doesn't.
Right? And in this case, the efficiency is the value of the learning at the top of the equation divided by the resources it takes to have obtained that learning. And for a large company, if you've got a lot of money, sometimes it's worth spending to, you know, get that learning in a way that is fast rather than cheap.
So lean doesn't mean cheap by any means. It means smart. And it means spending your budget in as smart and responsible a way as you can. It means getting your learnings early, but maybe you have to spend the money. Maybe you need to hire the data scientists, or you need to build the algorithm that's or buy the data. Those are not cheap things.
Yeah.
But it really means doing the upfront work that justifies the expenditure.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'll expand on that by saying that, you know, making a hire can be a pretty costly endeavor, right? Usually there is something way less than that that we can go and do, that we can use to learn before we need to, you know, buy some expensive.
Oh, for sure. But if you discover that that's, you know, during the initial process that you lack that talent, and it makes sense for you to go acquire it in whatever format, whether it's hire someone or contract with someone, then that's a necessary step that can be done later on. But don't go about, you know, sort of rush and hire people up front without discovering that you really need it.
Right. And the challenge here is that everybody thinks they need it. Right? This ties back into ego. Everybody thinks they need to go do boom, 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 these expensive things, and these time-consuming things, and these major commitments. When, you know, let me tell you, I don't know that I've met a team where I felt like the first step should not be customer interviews, which you should do with probably your existing staff and whoever you envision might be on the project in the future. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, and customer could be internal customer. You know, if it's
absolutely.
You know, if it's somebody that if you're building for within the company, like in my previous manufacturing example, go talk to your internal customers. People, you know, the other objection I used to get was, well, we're B2B. You know, we sell to other companies. You're still selling to people in those other companies.
Preach on. I got a question the other day that was said, you know, Elliot, really interesting presentation, good examples. They were all B2C. Does this really even work B2B? And I was baffled that somehow the connection wasn't there. But let's explore it, because I'm particularly interested in this topic.
Mm-hmm.
Lean startup in a B2B context. I think you started to dig into an area where I probably would as well,
Mm-hmm.
which is that you're still selling to a human.
Absolutely.
Right? And that human has a problem that you're
Mm-hmm.
solving.
Mm-hmm.
And probably if they're buying for an organization, it's not just a problem that the purchaser has, but that many people within that organization have. So talk to me a little bit about how you've applied lean startup in a B2B context.
That is such an important point, and the distinction between the purchaser and the end user.
Mm-hmm.
Because very often, even going back to our case with the economic development product, the purchaser wasn't the end user, and never the twain did meet, right?
Yeah.
The purchaser didn't understand the end user's pain point, and the problem ended up being in the purchaser bucket. So it's so important to understand who those two are.
Yeah.
And meeting your end users, whether it's B2B or B2C or whatever it is, eventually you are solving a problem and bringing value to your customers. It is of crucial importance to understand what that value is. And the only way to understand that is to actually talk to the people who are going to be using your product. Right?
Yes. Keying back into the joke I made earlier. What? Talk to the people that are ultimately going to use the product?
Right.
Yes. Right.
Otherwise, you've just wasted your time. So regardless of the context, I believe you whether it's B2B, B2C, I think what happens often is we in the popular media, there's all the examples that are used are B2C most often, so they'll use Coke or they'll use Apple. These are all our representative sort of, touchstones in terms of great service. And I think sometimes people switch off because they don't have that kind of budget. They don't have the sort of marketing dollars, or they don't have that sort of customer. So again, as I told you, we have sort of quote unquote boring customers as well as B2C. And I always try to learn and bring these examples of the more boring ones as well, because they're equally relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. The B2B space is really interesting because I'll tell you, there seems to be this perception that all the exact same types of experiments you run in a B2C world don't work in a B2B world, right? Like you can still do a landing page test. You can still do a Wizard of Oz. You can still do a concierge. And maybe there are more barriers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. But to me, when there are more barriers and the sales cycles are longer, it seems even more important to be doing lean startup style experiments to figure out, before you invest some huge number of months heading in the wrong direction, trying to sell to a group that doesn't actually need the things you're trying to sell. Does that make sense?
Totally does. And you know what, the other thing people have to realize is that consumer expectations have changed, right? We're all accustomed to these auto magical experiences out in the real world.
Yeah, sure.
So why should you then come into work and then have a totally crappy user experience that doesn't meet your needs?
Oh boy, user experience. So,
right. So user experience, and I mean that both in terms of form and functionality.
Of course.
It's not just one or the other. So I came from the ERP world, where I used to work for PeopleSoft and built, financial software. And in those days, We didn't care about it at all because we were building B2B, and what choice did people have, right? They came
Sure.
in and they would use, whatever we had. Now, not to say that it was bad, it really was state of the art at that time.
It just wasn't top of mind, right? This is not the
Nobody-
most important thing.
Right. Nobody thought about it. But in today's world, where somebody on their mobile app has these amazing auto magical experiences, and then you expect them to come in and work on something that doesn't meet their need, they're going to find workarounds.
Sure.
They're going to find workarounds.
So before we go too deep into the topic of user experience, because I think we could easily spend a full webcast on that alone.
Mm-hmm.
I want to recap what we've talked about today and then close out.
Okay.
So we have covered a ton of ground on the topic of innovation, exploring this idea of ways in which big companies are sometimes struggling to get the kind of outcomes they want when they want to do something that's a little different than business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
And what advice, if you had to give like a few quick sound bites to sort of close, what advice would you give to someone working within a large organization who's been tasked with doing innovation or innovative new stuff?
The advice I would give and have frequently given is to make it someone's job to be thinking about it. Now, the someone doesn't have to be internal to the company. You could hire somebody else, but someone's job to be thinking about this sort of hockey stick innovation, and to keep an eye on sort of the radical disruption that may or may not be coming around in your industry, right? The incremental stuff is happening. IT is great at it. Let them forge ahead. But it needs to be someone's job to understand the customer journey, and look for gaps and opportunities within that to create this sort of hockey stick impact. And my organization, it could be a B2B, a B2C, a nonprofit, education, you name it, right?
Amen.
But whoever is delivering services to people, and we're all now software companies, we're all technology companies.
Yes.
It needs to be someone's job or someone's responsibility to understand the customer and understand value.
Yes.
And back to your point of user experience, one of the things that have been, I've really been thinking about is when you build, if you're building an API, what does design mean in an API-centric world?
API, by the way, stands for Application Programming
Interface.
Yeah.
When we built our chatbot on Slack, what was design? So design in that context was building a personality for the chatbot. So even, use a design means different things in different contexts.
Yes, indeed. Well, we have covered a ton of ground today. If listeners want to reach out to you to find out more information or learn more about your company, where can they find you?
We're at kovadigital.com. That's KOVA digital.com. And I'm available on LinkedIn or via email, sonali@kovadigital.com.
Amazing. My name is Elliot Susel, ELLIOT at leanstartup.co. If you have questions for me or anything related to this topic, let me know, and we will see you next time.